Good afternoon, boys and girls. Here's our chapter read aloud, chapter 5 of The Flying Flea, Callie, and Me. 5 weeks later, there was another storm. It was even worse than the last one. This time, when the storm came, I got to go inside the house with Callie. It was lots better than hiding under the ledge of the rock hill. Lots of changes has happened since the last storm. The little naked birds have gotten their feathers. One at a time, they have climbed out on the limb where their nest was and practiced flapping their wings. Bird and Papa Mockingbird were so busy feeding their babies, they didn't bother Callie, me, or even Bullsnake very much. One day, one of the babies jumped from a limb and tried to fly. Only he didn't make it very far. He landed in the middle of the yard. Callie and I hid from Papa Mockingbird until the baby managed to fly back up to the tree. Lately, every bird but one had been flying. They weren't as good as Bird and Papa Mockingbird, but they were flying all over the place. A couple were even starting to catch their own food, all except one bird. I didn't know what the problem was with that one, but it never left the nest. It didn't climb out on a limb and flap its wings. It just sat in the pile of twigs looking scared and nervous. I watched from out the front window, but I couldn't see any of the birds. I was glad when Mama opened the front door to let Callie and me out. I could hardly wait to investigate. Things were always different after a storm. The yard was covered with twigs and branches. Needles littered the ground around the tall pine tree. Grasshoppers moved slowly as the sunshine spread through the branches. I sat on my haunches and watched the apple tree. None of the birds were around. Papa Mockingbird was no place to be seen, and none of the babies flapped their wings or practiced flying from one tree to the next. The nest looked empty. Suddenly, I heard something flutter. Bird swooped down from a pine tree. She grabbed one of the grasshoppers who was sunning itself on the lilac leaf. With a bug in her beak, she flew to one of the branches that held her nest. But instead of going into the pile of twigs, she stood far out on the limb. She waited there a long time. Finally, a gray fuzzy head popped up from inside the nest. "I'm hungry," it chirped. "I'm not bringing you any more food," Bird mumbled. It was hard to understand her because she had a beak full of grasshopper. "If you want something to eat, you'll have to come out here and get it." Cautiously, the baby mockingbird hopped to the edge of the nest. Wings out for balance, she jumped to the limb where Bird stood. One step at a time, she eased her way toward her mother. But just as she reached out to take the grasshopper, Bird dropped it. "Oops," Bird said. "Fly down and get him. Quick, fly after him before he gets away." The baby mockingbird looked down at the ground. Then she turned, hopped sideways along the limb, and disappeared into the nest. Bird began to cry. My sharp ears pointed forward. I frowned, watching her for a minute, then walked to the woodpile. Bird didn't fly or swoop at me when I got near, so I climbed to the top of the logs. Bird still didn't come after me. "Hey, Bird, what's wrong?" She sighed. Her feathers drooped. "Oh, it's her," Bird sniffed. "All my other babies learned to fly just like they were supposed to. They've already left the nest. Even Papa Mockingbird has taken off on his journey south for the winter. Very soon I will have to leave too. But she won't fly. She won't even leave the nest." I stretched my neck, trying to see inside the pile of twigs. "Is she sick? Maybe she's hurt. Maybe that's why she won't fly." Bird ruffled her feathers. "No, she's strong and healthy. She just won't try her wings." Bird looked so sad, it made me feel sad too. "Is there anything I can do?" Bird glared down her pointed beak at me. "You're a cat. I'll stay long enough to feed her one more day. Then I must leave. If she doesn't fly away with me, you'll probably eat her. That's what cats do." "I don't eat birds," I told her, but she didn't listen. She wiped a tear from under her eye with one of her wing feathers. Then she flew away and began gathering moths and caterpillars to bring back to the nest. I felt very sad. After a time on the woodpile, I had to find some place to go. I had to find something to do to take my mind off the sad feeling I had inside. My tail flipped when I glanced at the barn. The last time I tried to check there, the big wood doors were closed. I licked my lips. I wondered if there were any mice in that barn. The doors were open just a crack, but there was enough space to stick my head in. My whiskers didn't even touch, so I knew there was plenty of room for the rest of me to fit through. Quiet as could be, I slipped inside. It was dark. I stood by the door a second until my eyes got used to the dim shadows. The barn was really big. The walls were made of metal and the roof was metal too. There were big wooden boards running across the top of the barn to hold the roof up. Other poles and boards came down the sides to hold the walls. There was hay inside too. I recognized the smell, but it didn't look like the hay in the field. This hay was all clumped together in big square chunks. I think the house daddy called them bales. They were piled, one on top of the other, along the sides and at the corners of the barn. To my left was an open room. There was no hay inside, not even any pieces scattered about. There was just a big concrete floor with a big black stain right in the middle. Another smell made my whiskers wiggle. It was a familiar odor, only I couldn't quite put my claw on it. Frowning, I looked around. There was something in the corner. My sharp eyes narrowed, trying to make it out. Suddenly, they flashed wide. It was a mouse. But what a mouse! The thing was huge. It looked like a mouse. It smelled like a mouse. But I had never seen such a big mouse. It was chewing on some little yellow chunks of grain. I swished my tail and flattened my ears. What a trophy! If I brought this to the mat, Mama couldn't help but be proud of me. Even if she forgot to look and stepped on it barefoot, she'd still be excited and impressed. I bet she wouldn't even yell at me. Inch at a time, I crept toward it. I kept low. Just a few more feet, and I would be close enough to pounce. Suddenly, I got this weird feeling. It kind of tingled the fur on the back of my neck. It made me feel strange, as if someone was watching me. I stopped and looked around. Another giant mouse glared down at me from the top of a hay bale. His beady eyes never blinked as he sat licking his lips. 2 giant mouses? The mama wouldn't believe her eyes. She would know I was the best mouser in the world. The little scratchy sound behind me made me whirl around. Now there were 3. A huge mouse had appeared between me and the door. Crouching close to the ground, he glared at me with beady yellow eyes. It made the hair on my back stand up. It was a weird feeling, like my hair was crawling and got stuck up in a sharp ridge down my spine. My tail jerked back and forth all by itself. It was like I had no control of it. "Hey, cat!" the giant mouse on the top of the hay bale sneered. "What do you think you're doing in my barn?" "Your barn? Mice don't have barns. It doesn't belong to you. I thought this was the house people's barn." My tail flipped again. Quickly, I sat on it so they wouldn't see how nervous I was. He grinned and licked his lips. "I'm not a mouse," he smiled. "I'm a rat." "A rat? What's a rat?" The one behind me moved closer. "Rats are big. Rats are very smart. And rats are always..." "Rats are always what?" I tried to get him to finish what he was telling me. The one in the hay jumped to the floor of the barn. His teeth glistened when he glanced toward the other big mouse who was eating the yellow grain. "Hey, Nora," he whispered. "Look what we got here." The one he called Nora dropped the piece of grain she was munching and moved toward me. Her eyes were small and beady. When she smiled, her lips curled. She had big, long, yellow teeth. "Ooh," she licked her lips. "A little kitty cat." "Rats are always what?" I asked again. All 3 mice, I mean rats, moved toward me. They came closer and closer. The ridge of hair that stood up on my back went clear down to the tip of my tail now. All fuzzed up, it was so big that it was almost impossible for me to sit on it. I eased to my feet. My tail shot straight up in the air behind me. It was nearly as big around as the rest of me. The huge rats moved closer. One stood between me and the door. On trembling legs, I took a step back. The one named Nora licked her lips again. "Rats are big. Rats are small." Her eyes seemed to sparkle. "And rats are always hungry." I couldn't hold still. My legs took off. I ran. At the far corner of the barn was a pile of hay. That didn't stop me. I scampered up the bales of hay. I got as far away from that huge rat as could be. My legs shook so hard I couldn't barely stand. I shoved myself into the corner of the barn, panting and gasping for air. The rats were no place in sight, but I could hear them somewhere. They were giggling and laughing at me. A puff of red exploded in front of my eyes. "You're a cat," I growled to myself. "Cats aren't afraid of mice. Cats aren't afraid of rats. Cats eat rats for snacks. What's wrong with you? Get down from this stack of hay and go get 'em." I took a deep breath and stepped out from the corner. I'm a cat, I thought. I can do this. "Here, kitty, kitty, kitty." The voice came from above me. Eyes wide, I looked up. One of the rats stood on a wood rafter just over my head. My bottom bumped the tin wall. When I backed into the corner once more, a sharp, pointy nose appeared over the bale of hay where I stood. Nora's beady eyes followed. "There you are. I thought we lost you for a second." She smiled and licked her lips once more. "Here, kitty, kitty, kitty." I was trapped like a cat. The huge rats had me pinned in the corner. They had me surrounded. There was no escape. Boys and girls, that's it for chapter 5. Listen to tomorrow and the afternoon, and we will have chapter 6.